The dusty streets of Abilene, Kansas stretched before Catherine right like a judgment she could never escape. Every step toward the mercantile reminding her of the scarlet dress she used to wear in the Golden Rose Saloon just 6 months prior in the spring of 1878. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as Catherine clutched her simple cotton dress, the modest blue fabric a far cry from the revealing satin and lace that had once been her uniform. She had arrived in Abilene 3 days ago on the westbound train, carrying nothing but a worn carpetbag, and enough money saved from her time working tables and singing songs to keep her fed for perhaps 2 weeks if she was careful. The town bustled with cattle drives coming through, cowboys whooping and hollering as they guided longhorns down the wide main street, kicking up clouds of red dust that settled on everything and everyone. Catherine had chosen Abilene specifically because it was far enough from Dodge City, where she had worked at the Golden Rose for nearly 2 years after her parents died of fever. She had been 18 then, desperate and alone, with no family and no prospects. The saloon owner, a hard-faced woman named Marlene, had offered her work serving drinks and entertaining the cowboys who flooded into town after months on the trail. Catherine had told herself it was temporary, that she would save money and move on to something respectable. But the months had turned into years, and the shame had settled into her bones like the Kansas cold in winter. She had never crossed the line that some of the other girls had, never took men upstairs to the rooms on the second floor, but she had served them whiskey with a smile, had sung bawdy songs on the small stage, had let them call her kitty and treat her like she was theirs for the price of a drink. The memory made her stomach turn now as she walked past respectable women who would never look at her twice if they knew the truth. The mercantile was cool and dim after the bright street, and Catherine took a moment to let her eyes adjust. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with everything from canned goods to bolts of fabric, from lanterns to horse tack. An older man with spectacles stood behind the counter, and he nodded at her politely. "Help you, miss." "I'm looking for work," Catherine said, keeping her voice steady. "Any kind of honest work. I can clean, I can cook, I can do figures if needed." The shopkeeper looked sympathetic but shook his head. "Sorry, miss. Business is steady but not enough to take on help. You might try the hotel, or perhaps some of the ranch wives might need assistance." Catherine thanked him and stepped back into the brutal sunshine. She had tried the hotel yesterday with no luck, and the restaurant had told her the same. Her money was dwindling faster than she had anticipated, and the boarding house where she had taken a room was due payment in 4 days. She was about to head toward the edge of town, where she had heard some of the smaller ranches might be found, when a commotion erupted near the cattle pens. A massive longhorn had broken free from the herd, its horns swinging dangerously as it charged down the street. People scattered, screaming, diving into doorways and behind water troughs. Catherine froze, her heart hammering as the animal barreled straight toward her. She could see its wild eyes, could hear the thunder of its hooves, and her legs simply would not move. This was it, she thought distantly. This was how it ended, trampled in the street like the worthless thing she had become. Then a rider appeared from nowhere, a blur of horse and man, cutting between Catherine and the charging steer. The cowboy leaned low in his saddle, rope already spinning above his head, and with a precision that seemed impossible, he threw the lasso. It settled around the longhorn's horns, and the cowboy's horse planted its feet, muscles bunching as it took the animal's weight. The steer jerked to a halt not 10 feet from where Catherine stood, bellowing its fury but held fast. Other cowboys rushed in to help, and within minutes the animal was being led back to the pens, subdued and manageable. Catherine stood trembling, her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. The rider who had saved her dismounted and walked over, leading his horse, a beautiful paint with intelligent eyes. "You all right, ma'am?" Catherine looked up at him and felt something in her chest shift. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were the color of summer grass, green and clear, and they looked at her with genuine concern. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from years of honest work under the open sky. Yes, thank you, you saved my life. He smiled, a slow, easy expression that transformed his serious face. Just doing what needed doing. That steer had a burr under its hide about something. Name's James Thornton. I run a cattle ranch about 8 miles north of here. Catherine Wright, she said, and then, because she could not help herself, because he had just risked his life for a stranger, she added, I'm very grateful, Mr. Thornton. James is fine, he said, studying her with those green eyes. You new to Abilene? I haven't seen you around before. I arrived 3 days ago. I'm looking for work, actually. Anything respectable. Something flickered in James's expression, a kind of thoughtful consideration. You know anything about ranching? I'm afraid not, Catherine admitted. But I'm a hard worker and I learn quickly. I can cook and clean and manage a household. My mother taught me before she passed. James was quiet for a moment, absently stroking his horse's neck. My ranch is called the Lazy T. It's a good spread, about 3,000 acres, running 500 head of cattle. I've got 4 ranch hands who work for me, good men, but they're cowboys, not housekeepers. The bunkhouse is one thing, but the main house is falling into disrepair. I'm not home enough to keep it up proper, and when I am, I'm too tired to do more than cook beans and fall into bed. I could use someone to manage the house, do the cooking for the hands, keep things running smooth. Catherine's heart leaped. I could do that. I promise you wouldn't regret it. It's isolated out there, James warned. The nearest neighbor is 4 miles away. It's just me and the hands, and the work is hard. I'd pay fair wages, $20 a month plus room and board. You'd have your own room in the main house, totally separate and private. The hands are good men, but I run a respectable operation. Anyone steps out of line, they answer to me. $20 a month was more than Catherine had dared hope for. She nodded quickly. When can I start? I've got business in town today, but I'll be heading back tomorrow morning. Meet me here at dawn and I'll take you out to the ranch. Bring whatever belongings you have. They shook hands, and Catherine felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. He tipped his hat to her and mounted his horse in one fluid motion, riding back toward the cattle pens where the other cowboys were securing the last of the herd. Catherine walked back to her boarding house in a daze, barely believing her luck. A job, a real job, with good pay and respectable work. She would be cooking and cleaning, not serving drinks to drunk cowboys or singing for their entertainment. It felt like a miracle, like maybe God had not completely abandoned her after all. That night, she packed her meager belongings, washing her one good dress and mending a tear in her skirt. She barely slept, her mind racing with plans and worries. What if she was not good enough? What if James Thornton discovered her past and sent her away in disgust? She pushed the thoughts down, reminding herself that she had a chance at a new life and she would not waste it. Dawn found her standing on the main street with her carpetbag, watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue to pale gold. James appeared as the first rays of sun broke over the horizon, riding his paint horse and leading a gentle-looking mare. Morning, Miss Wright. This is Daisy. She's got an easy gait, perfect for someone not used to riding. Catherine had ridden a few times as a child, but it had been years. James helped her mount, his hands respectful and careful, and they set off north out of town as Abilene began to wake behind them. The land rolled away in gentle swells, covered in tall prairie grass that rippled like water in the morning breeze. Wildflowers dotted the landscape in splashes of yellow and purple, and the sky stretched overhead in an endless blue dome. Catherine had spent the last 2 years in saloons and boarding houses, in the cramped, dusty streets of cattle towns, and she had forgotten how beautiful the open prairie could be. James rode beside her, pointing out landmarks, a distinctive stand of cottonwoods that marked the creek running through his property, a rocky outcropping that the hands called Hawk's Point because eagles nested there. He talked about the ranch with obvious pride, explaining how he had bought the land 4 years ago when he was just 22, scraping together every penny from years of working cattle drives. It was nothing but empty grassland and dreams back then, he said, his eyes distant with memory. I built the house myself with help from some of the men who work for me now. We put up the barn and the bunkhouse, dug the well, strung the fences. Every board and nail represents sweat and hope. You must be very proud, Catherine said softly. I am, but it's lonely too. A ranch needs a family to make it a home, not just a place to work yourself to death. There was something wistful in his voice, and Catherine felt a pang of sympathy. James Thornton was a good man, she could tell already, the kind of man who worked hard and treated people fairly. He deserved a wife, children, a full table at supper time. She pushed away the thought that she could never be that for him, that her past disqualified her from the kind of future he was describing. They reached the ranch just as the sun was climbing toward midday. Catherine's first glimpse of the lazy tea made her breath catch. The main house was a sturdy 2-story structure built of good timber, with a wraparound porch and real glass windows. It needed paint and some repair work, but the bones were solid and strong. Beyond it stood a large barn, a bunkhouse, and several corrals where horses milled about. Cattle dotted the distant hills, dark shapes against the golden grass. 4 men emerged from the bunkhouse as they rode up, wiping their hands on their pants and squinting at Catherine with curiosity. James dismounted and helped her down, then made introductions. Boys, this is Miss Catherine Wright. She'll be managing the house and cooking for us. Miss Wright, these are my hands. That's Tom Fletcher, he's been with me since the beginning. Next to him is Charlie Dawson, then Miguel Santos, and the young one is Danny Parker. Tom was in his 40s, weathered and lean with kind eyes. Charlie was perhaps 30, red-haired and freckled with a ready grin. Miguel was a few years older than James, dark-haired and serious, with the careful manners of someone who had faced discrimination and learned to navigate it with dignity. Danny could not have been more than 19, tall and gangly with an eager puppy enthusiasm. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am," Tom said, and the others echoed the sentiment, removing their hats respectfully. "Miss Wright will have the bedroom on the first floor, the one off the kitchen," James said. "Her quarters are private, and I expect everyone to treat her with complete respect. Anyone has a problem with that, they can draw their pay and move on." The men nodded, and Catherine saw no resentment in their faces, only curiosity and perhaps relief at the prospect of decent meals. James showed her inside, and Catherine tried not to let her dismay show. The house was indeed in disarray, dust coating every surface, dishes piled in the kitchen, cobwebs in the corners. The furniture was good quality but needed care, the floors needed scrubbing, the windows were so dirty they barely let in light. "I know it's bad," James said apologetically. "We've been batching it for months. The last woman who tried to help out lasted 2 weeks before she decided ranch life was not for her and headed back to town." "It's nothing that hard work cannot fix," Catherine said firmly. "By the end of the week, you will not recognize this place." James smiled at her, that slow, warm expression that made something flutter in Catherine's chest. "I believe you. Let me show you your room and then I'll leave you to settle in. Supper is usually around 6 if that suits you." Her room was small but charming, with a real bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the eastern hills. It was more space than she had had to herself in years, and infinitely better than the cramped room she had shared with 2 other girls at the Golden Rose. Catherine unpacked her few belongings, changed into her work dress, and set to tackling the kitchen. She worked until her back ached and her hands were raw. But by evening the kitchen was clean, the dishes washed and put away, the stove scrubbed and ready for cooking. She found supplies in the pantry, flour and beans and salt pork, some withered vegetables that were just barely usable, and set about making a decent meal. She baked biscuits and made a stew with the salt pork and vegetables, stretching the ingredients to feed 6 people. When she rang the dinner bell at 6, the men came in looking skeptical, as if they expected the same burnt beans and hard bread they had been eating for months. But when Catherine set the food on the table, their faces transformed. The stew was rich and savory, the biscuits were golden and fluffy, and she had even managed to make a simple dried apple dessert with some old fruit she found in the pantry. "Lord have mercy," Charlie said around a mouthful of biscuit. "Miss Wright, if you cook like this every day, I might never leave this ranch." The others laughed and echoed the sentiment, and Catherine felt a warm glow of pride. James caught her eye from across the table and smiled, and she found herself smiling back, feeling something that might have been happiness beginning to take root in her chest. The days fell into a rhythm. Catherine rose before dawn to make breakfast for the men, hearty meals of eggs and bacon and flapjacks to fuel their long days of work. She spent her mornings cleaning, slowly bringing order and beauty back to the house. She scrubbed floors and washed windows, beat rugs and mended curtains, polished furniture until it gleamed. In the afternoons, she prepared supper, getting more creative as she learned what supplies James kept on hand and what she could request on the weekly supply run to town. The men treated her with courtesy and respect, careful to wipe their boots before entering, always tipping their hats and saying please and thank you. Danny in particular seemed to worship her, blushing scarlet whenever she spoke to him directly. Miguel taught her some Spanish words and told her stories about growing up in Texas. Tom and Charlie were full of jokes and tall tales, keeping spirits light even after long, exhausting days. But it was James who occupied Catherine's thoughts more and more as the weeks passed. He was always kind, always respectful, but she began to notice the way his eyes followed her when he thought she was not looking. She noticed how he lingered over coffee after the other men had gone back to work, asking about her day, telling her about problems with a fence line or a cow with a difficult birth. He brought her wildflowers once, a huge bouquet of prairie roses and black-eyed Susans, claiming he had seen them and thought they might brighten up the house. Catherine found herself watching for him too, listening for his step on the porch, feeling her heart lift when he smiled at her. She began to take more care with her appearance, pinning her dark hair more carefully, pressing her dresses even though they would just get dirty again with cooking. She told herself it was foolish, that a man like James Thornton could have any respectable woman in the county, but her heart did not seem to care what her head said. One evening in early July, about 6 weeks after Catherine had arrived at the Lazy Tea, James asked her to take a walk with him after supper. The other men had retired to the bunkhouse, and the sunset was painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. They walked toward the creek, following a worn path through the grass. "I wanted to thank you, Miss Wright," James said as they walked. "The ranch has never run so smoothly. The men are happier, better fed, and I come home at night to a house that actually feels like a home instead of just a place to sleep. You've made a real difference here." "I'm glad," Catherine said quietly. "I've been happier here than I've been in years. This is good work, meaningful work. I feel like I'm building something instead of just surviving." James was quiet for a moment, and Catherine could see him wrestling with something, his jaw working as if he was trying to find the right words. Finally, he stopped walking and turned to face her. "Miss Wright, Catherine, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, getting to know you, watching you bring life back to the ranch, I've found myself feeling things I did not expect. I'm not a man who is good with words, but I need you to know that I've come to care for you deeply. More than just as an employee. I would like permission to court you proper if you're willing." Catherine's breath caught in her throat. This was what she had been hoping for and dreading in equal measure. James was everything she had never dared dream of, good and honest and kind, offering her not just security but genuine affection. But he did not know the truth, did not know what she had been. "James, she started, and then stopped, not knowing how to continue. "If you do not feel the same way, I understand," he said quickly. "I would never want to make you uncomfortable. You can stay on working here regardless with no hard feelings, but I had to tell you how I felt." "It's not that," Catherine said, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "James, there's something I need to tell you, something about my past. Before I came to Abilene, before I met you, I worked in Dodge City. I was a saloon girl." She forced herself to look at him as she said it, to see the disgust and disappointment she was sure would fill his face. But James just looked at her steadily, his green eyes never wavering. "Go on," he said quietly. "I worked at a place called the Golden Rose for 2 years. I served drinks and sang songs and let cowboys treat me like I was something they could buy. I never went upstairs with them, never crossed that line, but I was still part of that world. I wore those dresses and smiled those smiles and took their money. I'm not the respectable woman you think I am, James. I'm ashamed of what I was." The words tumbled out in a rush, and Catherine felt the shame wash over her like it always did, hot and choking. She waited for James to turn away, to tell her to pack her things and leave his ranch. Instead, he reached out and took her hands in his grip warm and firm. "Catherine, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, tears blurring her vision. "I don't care what you had to do to survive," James said, his voice steady and sure. "I care about who you are now, the woman I've come to know these past weeks. You're hardworking and kind, you're smart and capable, and you treat everyone with respect and dignity. Whatever you did in Dodge City, that's in the past. All I care about is the future and whether you might want to share that future with me. But James, people will talk. If anyone finds out, it could hurt you, hurt the ranch. Let them talk," he said firmly. "I make my own judgments about people, and I've judged you to be one of the finest women I've ever met. If you'll have me, Catherine Wright, I'd like to court you properly, and if things go the way I hope they will, I'd like to make you my wife. You would not be a saloon girl anymore. You would be a rancher's wife, my wife, and I would be proud to have you at my side." Catherine could not stop the tears then, but they were tears of relief and joy rather than shame. James pulled her into his arms, and she rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. For the first time since her parents had died, she felt truly safe, truly valued. "I would like that very much," she whispered. "I would like to be courted by you, James Thornton." He kissed the top of her head, gentle and chaste, and they stood there by the creek as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, holding each other and beginning to believe in second chances. The courtship was everything Catherine could have hoped for. James was attentive and romantic in his own quiet way, bringing her little gifts, a ribbon for her hair from town, a book of poetry he thought she might like, a silver hair comb that had belonged to his mother. They took walks together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other's dreams and fears. Catherine told him about her childhood, how her father had been a schoolteacher and her mother a seamstress, how they had been educated and respectable until the fever took them both within a week of each other when Catherine was 18. She described the desperate months that followed, trying to find work as a governess or companion, but being turned away everywhere because she had no references, no family connections. The saloon had been a last resort, the only place that would take her in and pay her enough to survive. James told her about his own past, growing up on a small farm in Missouri, the youngest of 6 children. His father had died when James was 15, and he had left home to find work, spending years as a cowboy on cattle drives before saving enough to buy his own land. He had always dreamed of building something lasting, creating a legacy, but he had been so focused on the work that he had never taken time to find a wife, to build the family he wanted. "I was starting to think I had waited too long," he admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the darkness. "That I would end up a lonely old bachelor, rich in land but poor in what really matters. Then you came along, and suddenly everything seemed possible again." Catherine reached over and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I thought my life was over, that I had ruined any chance at happiness. You gave me hope again, James. You made me believe I could be more than my mistakes." The ranch hands watched their courtship with approval and good-natured teasing. Tom took to humming love songs whenever James was nearby, and Charlie made exaggerated swooning gestures until James threatened to make him muck out the entire barn by himself. Miguel was more serious, pulling Catherine aside one day to tell her quietly that he had never seen James so happy, and that she was good for him. Even Danny, who had nursed a small crush on Catherine himself, seemed genuinely delighted for them. In late August, 3 months after Catherine had arrived at the Lazy Tea, James asked her to marry him. They had ridden out to Hawks Point, the rocky outcropping that overlooked the entire ranch, and were watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. James dismounted and helped Catherine down, then led her to a flat rock where they could sit and take in the view. "I brought you here because this is my favorite place on the ranch," he said. "This is where I come when I need to think, when I need to remind myself why I work so hard. From here you can see everything we've built, everything we're protecting and growing." Catherine looked out at the view, the ranch buildings small and neat in the distance, the cattle grazing peacefully, the creek winding through the grassland like a silver ribbon. It was beautiful and vast and full of promise. "Catherine, I know we have not been courting very long by conventional standards, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness, your determination to build a better life. I love how you've brought warmth and joy to this ranch, to my life. I want to spend the rest of my days with you, building this place together, raising a family together, growing old together. Will you marry me?" He pulled out a small box and opened it, revealing a simple gold band with a small sapphire, the deep blue of a Kansas summer sky. Catherine gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "It was my grandmother's ring," James said. "My mother gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to a woman I loved with my whole heart. That's you, Catherine. You're the woman I've been waiting for my whole life." "Yes," Catherine said through her tears. "Yes, James, I'll marry you. I love you so much." James slipped the ring on her finger, and then he kissed her, properly this time, a kiss full of promise and passion and the beginning of forever. Catherine kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into it, feeling his arms around her strong and sure. They rode back to the ranch as the stars were coming out, and when they told the hands the news, the men erupted in cheers and congratulations. Tom broke out a bottle of good whiskey he had been saving, and they all toasted the happy couple, even Catherine taking a small sip to be sociable. The men insisted on hearing the proposal story, and James recounted it with obvious pride while Catherine blushed and laughed. That night, lying in her small room, Catherine stared at the ring on her finger and marveled at how much her life had changed in just 4 months. She had gone from a desperate saloon girl with no prospects to a woman engaged to a good man, about to become a rancher's wife. It felt like a dream, too good to be true, and she sent up a prayer of thanks to God for giving her this second chance. They set the wedding date for late September, giving them time to make preparations. James wanted to do it right, to give Catherine the wedding she deserved. He hired a carpenter to make repairs to the house, painting the exterior a cheerful yellow with white trim, fixing the porch railing, building Catherine a proper pantry off the kitchen. He ordered supplies from Kansas City, including fabric for a wedding dress, fine china for their table, and bedroom furniture to replace the simple bed in what would become their shared room. Catherine threw herself into preparations, sewing her dress with help from Maria Santos, Miguel's wife, who lived on a small ranch 4 miles away and became a fast friend. Maria was a cheerful, round-faced woman with 6 children and endless energy, and she insisted on teaching Catherine to make tortillas and tamales, claiming no ranch wife should be without those skills. Catherine also made curtains for every window, embroidered pillowcases, and planned a menu for the wedding feast. They decided to have the ceremony at the ranch rather than in town, wanting something intimate and meaningful. James invited the few neighboring ranchers he was friendly with, and Catherine sent word to the owner of her boarding house in Abilene. a kind older woman named Mrs. Henderson who had been good to her. The circuit preacher agreed to ride out to perform the ceremony, and everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place. Then, 2 weeks before the wedding, Catherine's past came calling. She was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when she heard horses approaching, unusual in the middle of a weekday when visitors rarely came. She wiped her floury hands on her apron and went to the door, expecting to see one of the neighbors or perhaps someone looking for work. Instead, 3 men sat on their horses in the yard, and Catherine's blood ran cold. She recognized 2 of them from Dodge City, regulars at the Golden Rose. The third was a hard-faced man in a fancy suit, and with a sinking feeling, Catherine realized he must be Ralph Carson, the owner of the Golden Rose. Marlene, the woman who had managed the day-to-day operations, had mentioned him occasionally, always with a mixture of fear and respect. "Well, well," Carson said, dismounting and looking around the ranch with calculating eyes. "This is quite a step up from the Golden Rose, Kitty, or should I call you Catherine now?" Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she thought she might be sick. "What do you want?" "I left Dodge City months ago. I don't work for you anymore." "True enough," Carson said, climbing the porch steps until he was standing uncomfortably close to her. "But you left without giving proper notice, and you left owing me money. Room and board for your last 2 weeks, remember. Plus the cost of that dress you ruined when you spilled whiskey all over it. I figure you owe me about $60. "I don't owe you anything," Catherine said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I worked off any debt before I left." "That's not how I remember it," Carson said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Of course we could forget about the debt. I'm a reasonable man, but I'd hate to have to tell your new employer about your past employment. James Thornton is his name, right? Respectable rancher, good reputation. Wonder how he'd feel knowing his housekeeper used to entertain drunk cowboys for a living." Catherine felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "He knows," she said, lifting her chin. "I told him everything." Carson's eyebrows rose in surprise, and then he laughed. "Did you now? And he kept you on." "Either he is more desperate than I thought, or you left out some of the more colorful details. Tell me, Catherine, did you mention that time you sat on that trail boss's lap and let him nuzzle your neck while his boys cheered? Or the time you sang that song about the cowboy and the milkmaid, the one that made even the piano player blush? Did you tell him how the men used to line up to buy you drinks, hoping they would be the one you finally said yes to?" "I never said yes to anyone," Catherine said fiercely. "I served drinks and sang songs, that's all." "Maybe so," Carson said, "but perception is reality in this world. You were a saloon girl and everyone knows what that means. Now I'll give you a choice. Pay me the $60, or I'll make sure everyone in Abilene knows exactly what Catherine Wright used to be. I'll tell the preacher, the neighbors, anyone who will listen. By the time I'm done, Thornton's reputation will be in tatters just for associating with you. Think about what that will do to his business, his standing in the community." Catherine wanted to scream, to cry, to throw this vile man off the porch, but she knew he meant every word. Men like Carson thrived on manipulation and intimidation. She had $60, the wages she had saved from her months at the ranch. She had been planning to use it to buy things for her new life with James, practical things like a good coat for winter and material for baby clothes when the time came. But she would give every penny if it meant protecting James. "I'll get you the money," she said quietly. "Wait here." She went inside and retrieved the small metal box where she kept her savings, counting out $60 in bills and coins. Her hands shook as she brought it back to Carson, feeling like she was handing over a piece of her soul. Carson counted it carefully, then tipped his hat in a mockery of politeness. "Pleasure doing business with you, Miss Wright. You enjoy your new life now." He mounted his horse, and the 3 men rode away, leaving Catherine standing on the porch feeling hollow and sick. She went back inside and sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. That was how James found her an hour later when he came in from checking the south fence. He took one look at her face and was at her side immediately, kneeling beside her chair. "Catherine, what's wrong? What happened?" She told him everything, the words spilling out in a rush. Carson's visit, his threats, the money she had paid him. James's face grew darker and darker as she spoke, his jaw clenching, his hands fisting at his sides. "That son of a—" he caught himself, taking a deep breath. "Catherine, you should have called for me. I would have run him off the property." "I couldn't risk it," Catherine said miserably. "He would have gone to town and ruined you, James. Your reputation, your business, everything you've built. I couldn't let that happen." James pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Listen to me. I don't care what Ralph Carson or anyone else says about you or about me. You're going to be my wife, and nothing is going to change that. If people want to talk, let them talk. Anyone who matters will judge us by who we are now, not by what happened in the past." "But James, the wedding, what if he comes back? What if he tells people anyway?" "Then we'll face it together," James said firmly. "Catherine, I love you. That hasn't changed because some saloon owner tried to shake you down for money. If anything, I'm even more certain that you're the strongest, bravest woman I've ever known. You could have hidden this from me, could have kept paying Carson to keep quiet, but you told me the truth. That takes courage." Catherine wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love would be enough to overcome the past. But she had seen how quickly people turned on those they deemed immoral or improper. Women especially were held to impossible standards, and a former saloon girl marrying a respectable rancher would be scandalous gossip for months. Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine waited for the other shoe to drop, for someone to come to the ranch with disgusted looks and cutting words. But nothing happened. The neighbors who had been invited to the wedding sent their acceptances. Mrs. Henderson sent word that she was looking forward to the ceremony, and the preacher confirmed he would be there to officiate. James was attentive and loving, clearly trying to reassure Catherine without smothering her. He talked about their future together, about the children they would have, about growing the ranch into something they could pass down to the next generation. Slowly, Catherine began to relax, to believe that maybe Carson had taken his money and left them alone. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, the September air crisp with the first hint of autumn. Catherine woke early in her small room for the last time, thinking about how tonight she would be sleeping in the main bedroom as Mrs. James Thornton. Maria arrived at dawn with her oldest daughter Alina to help Catherine prepare, and the 3 women spent the morning transforming the ranch house and the bride. The dress Catherine had sewn was simple but elegant, cream-colored cotton with tiny pearl buttons up the back and delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Maria wove wildflowers into Catherine's dark hair and pinned it up in a soft style that made her look younger and almost ethereal. When Catherine looked at herself in the small mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back, seeing not a saloon girl but a bride radiant with hope and love. The ceremony was held in front of the house, with chairs set up in rows for the guests. About 30 people had come, neighboring ranchers and their wives, a few folks from town, the ranch hands scrubbed clean and wearing their Sunday best. Maria's 6 children ran around playing until their father Miguel corralled them into their seats. James waited near the makeshift altar the men had built, Tom and Charlie standing up with him as his groomsmen. He wore a new suit, dark wool with a white shirt and string tie, his hair slicked back and his face shaved clean. When he saw Catherine emerge from the house with Maria at her side, his face lit up with such joy and love that Catherine felt her last doubts melt away. She walked toward him across the prairie grass, feeling the sun on her face and the ring on her finger, aware that every step was taking her closer to the life she had always wanted but never thought she could have. When she reached James, he took her hand and squeezed it gently, his green eyes locked on hers. The preacher, a kindly older man with a booming voice, opened his Bible and began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Catherine barely heard the words, too focused on James, on the feel of his hand holding hers, on the reality of this moment. This was happening. She was marrying this good, honorable man who knew her past and loved her anyway. Do you, James Thornton, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, James said, his voice strong and sure. And do you, Catherine Wright, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? I do, Catherine said, her voice trembling with emotion. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. James, you may kiss your bride. James cupped Catherine's face in his hands and kissed her tenderly, and the assembled guests erupted in applause and cheers. Catherine kissed him back, feeling tears of joy on her cheeks, overwhelmed with gratitude and love. When they finally broke apart, James was grinning like a fool and Catherine was laughing through her tears. Ladies and gentlemen, the preacher announced, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. James Thornton. More applause, and then people were pressing forward to offer congratulations. The ranch hands were particularly enthusiastic, with Danny lifting Catherine right off her feet in a bear hug until James laughingly ordered him to put his wife down. Maria was crying happy tears, and even gruff old Tom had to wipe his eyes. The wedding feast was laid out on long tables the men had built, and Catherine had outdone herself with the cooking. There was roasted beef and fried chicken, fresh bread and butter, corn on the cob, green beans with bacon, mashed potatoes, and 3 different kinds of pie for dessert. The guests ate and drank and danced to music provided by a neighbor who played fiddle, the celebration continuing long into the afternoon. Catherine danced with James, laughing as he spun her around, then with each of the ranch hands and several of the neighbors. James danced with Maria and Mrs. Henderson and every other woman present, playing the role of gracious host to perfection. Everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time, and Catherine began to think that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right. Then, as the sun was beginning to set and guests were starting to make their farewells, a rider appeared on the road from town. Catherine's stomach dropped when she recognized Ralph Carson, and she saw James go tense beside her. Carson dismounted and walked straight toward them, ignoring the curious stares of the remaining guests. He was smiling, but it was not a friendly expression. "Congratulations on your wedding, Mr. Thornton, Mrs. Thornton," he said, emphasizing the last words. "I'm sorry I missed the ceremony. I was in Abilene on business and heard about it at the saloon. Figured I should come pay my respects." "You're not welcome here," James said flatly. "I know who you are and what you tried to do. You need to leave now." Now, is that any way to treat a guest?" Carson's voice was loud, carrying to the people still lingering nearby. "I just wanted to congratulate you on marrying one of my former employees. Catherine here, or Kitty as we used to call her, was quite popular at the Golden Rose. The Cowboys just loved her." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. She could see people turning to stare, confusion and shock rippling through the crowd. James stepped forward, putting himself between Carson and Catherine. "I said leave. You've been paid, you have no business here." "Oh, but I do have business here," Carson said, his voice dripping with false concern. "See, I'd feel terrible if all these good people didn't know what kind of woman you married. Catherine Wright worked in my saloon for 2 years, serving drinks and entertaining the customers. She was real good at making those cowboys feel special, if you know what I mean." "That's enough," James said, his voice deadly quiet, but Carson was on a roll, playing to the crowd. "Now, she claims she never went upstairs with any of them, and maybe that's true, maybe not. But she sure did everything else. Sat on their laps, let them touch her, sang dirty songs, took their money. A saloon girl through and through, and now she's pretending to be a respectable rancher's wife. Don't you think these good people deserve to know the truth?" The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine could feel everyone staring at her, could see the shock and disapproval on many faces. Mrs. Henderson looked distressed. Maria was crying again, but for a different reason now, and the neighboring ranchers and their wives were whispering urgently to each other. Then James spoke, and his voice rang out clear and strong over the assembled crowd. Yes, Catherine worked in a saloon. She's told me all about it, held nothing back. After her parents died, she had no family, no money, and no prospects. She did what she had to do to survive, and there's no shame in that. She served drinks and sang songs, that's all. She never compromised her virtue, never gave up her dignity no matter how desperate things got. And when she had saved enough money, she left that life behind and came here looking for honest work. He turned to look at Catherine, his eyes full of love and pride. This woman, my wife, has worked harder than anyone I've ever known. She took a house that was falling apart and made it a home. She feeds my ranch hands and keeps everything running smooth. She's kind and generous and brave, braver than most people will ever have to be. I asked her to marry me knowing everything about her past, and I'd do it again 1,000 times over. Because Catherine Thornton is a rancher's wife now, my wife, and I'm proud to stand beside her. He turned back to Carson, and there was steel in his voice. You came here to humiliate her, to shame her in front of our friends and neighbors. But all you've done is show everyone here what kind of small, petty man you are. Someone who makes his money off the desperation of others, and then tries to destroy them when they find a better way. I want you off my property right now, and if I ever see you near my wife or my ranch again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. Tom and Charlie stepped forward, flanking James, making it clear that Carson would be forcibly removed if necessary. Carson looked at the three of them, then at the crowd where several other men were standing up, clearly ready to back James if needed. His smile finally faltered. Fine, he said, backing toward his horse. But don't come crying to me when the good people of Abilene won't associate with you anymore. A man is judged by the company he keeps, Thornton, and you've chosen to keep company with a whore. James started forward, fists clenched, but Catherine caught his arm. Let him go, she said quietly. He's not worth it. Carson mounted his horse and rode off, leaving a thick, awkward silence in his wake. Catherine looked around at the remaining guests, seeing a mix of expressions. Some looked shocked and disapproving, others looked sympathetic, and a few looked angry on her behalf. It was Mrs. Henderson who spoke first, the older woman walking over to take Catherine's hands in hers. Catherine, dear, I want you to know that I think you're one of the bravest young women I've ever met. Life dealt you a terrible hand, and you played it the best you could. Anyone who judges you for that is not worth your time or tears. Amen to that, said Maria, coming to stand beside them. Catherine is my friend and a good woman. What she did in the past to survive doesn't change who she is now. Tom stepped forward, removing his hat. Mrs. Thornton, speaking for all the boys, we're proud to work for you and the boss. You've been nothing but kind to us, and we don't care about anything else. One by one, other voices joined in, people offering their support and congratulations. Not everyone. There were a few couples who made quick excuses and left without another word. But more people stayed than Catherine had dared hope. The party gradually resumed, though with a more subdued atmosphere, and eventually the last guests departed, leaving just the Thorntons and the ranch hands. Catherine was exhausted, emotionally wrung out, and she swayed on her feet. James immediately swept her up into his arms, carrying her toward the house. I can walk, she protested weakly. I know, James said, but I've been wanting to carry my bride over the threshold, and I'm not missing my chance. He carried her inside and up the stairs to their bedroom, setting her gently on the bed they would share. The room was beautiful, painted a soft yellow with the new furniture James had ordered and curtains Catherine had sewn. It should have been the happiest night of her life, but all Catherine could think about was Carson's words, the looks on people's faces, the scandal they would cause. James, I'm so sorry, she said, tears finally spilling over. I've ruined everything. Your reputation, your standing in the community, all because of me." James sat beside her and pulled her into his arms, letting her cry against his chest. "You haven't ruined anything. Some people will talk, sure, but the people who matter, the people worth knowing, they'll judge us by who we are, not by gossip. And the ones who can't see past your past, I don't want them as friends anyway. But what about your business? What if the ranchers won't deal with you anymore? What if—" "Catherine, stop," James said gently, tilting her face up to look at him. "Listen to me, I don't care, do you understand? I don't care if we lose some business or some friends. I care about you, about us, about building a life together. Everything else is just noise." "How can you be so sure?" Catherine asked desperately. "How can you not regret this, regret me?" "Because I love you," James said simply. "I love you more than I care about what anyone thinks. I meant every word I said out there. You're a rancher's wife now, my wife, and that's all that matters. We'll face whatever comes together, and we'll be stronger for it." Catherine looked into his eyes and saw the absolute certainty there, the unwavering love and commitment. Slowly, she let herself believe him, let herself accept that maybe love really was enough. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much it scares me." James kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Catherine kissed him back, pouring all her fear and love and gratitude into it. They made love that night as husband and wife, gentle and tender, learning each other's bodies and hearts. Afterwards, lying in James's arms with her head on his chest, Catherine finally felt the last of her shame begin to lift. She was not a saloon girl anymore. She was Catherine Thornton, rancher's wife, and she was home. The weeks following the wedding were challenging but also clarifying. 3 of the neighboring ranchers stopped doing business with James, refusing to participate in cattle drives or equipment sharing arrangements they had previously maintained. Some of the women in town gave Catherine the cold shoulder when she went in for supplies, whispering behind their hands and refusing to acknowledge her greetings. But others stepped up in ways that surprised and touched Catherine. Maria became an even closer friend, bringing her children to visit and insisting that Catherine join the quilting circle that met at her house once a month. Tom's sister, who ran a boarding house in town, made a point of inviting the Thorntons to Sunday dinner and introducing Catherine to other business owners who were more interested in character than scandal. Even the preacher, who could have easily distanced himself, stopped by the ranch to check on them and offer his support. The ranch continued to prosper despite the social difficulties. James was an excellent rancher, and his cattle were some of the finest in the county. Buyers didn't care about his wife's past. They cared about the quality of his beef, and business continued steady. The ranch hands were loyal and hardworking, and the household ran like a well-oiled machine with Catherine managing everything. As autumn turned to winter, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when she finally confirmed it with Maria's help, she was overwhelmed with joy and terror in equal measure. She told James one evening after supper, nervous about his reaction. "I'm going to have a baby," she said simply, watching his face. James stared at her for a long moment, and then a slow smile spread across his face, growing and growing until he was grinning like a madman. He let out a whoop of joy and picked Catherine up, spinning her around until she was laughing and demanding to be put down. "We're having a baby," he said wonderingly, setting her down carefully as if she might break. "Catherine, this is the best news. When?" "Maria thinks late May, early June," Catherine said, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Are you happy?" "Happy. I'm the happiest man alive. We're going to be parents." The ranch hands were nearly as excited when they heard the news, and immediately began treating Catherine like she was made of spun glass, insisting she sit down whenever possible and refusing to let her do any heavy work. James became almost comically protective, worrying about everything from her walking down the stairs to her lifting a pot off the stove. "James, I'm pregnant, not an invalid," Catherine finally said in exasperation. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I promise I'll be careful." Winter settled over the prairie, bringing snow and cold winds. Catherine spent her days keeping the house warm and comfortable, cooking hearty meals, and sewing baby clothes from soft flannel fabric James brought from town. She read books on childbirth and infant care, talked to Maria about what to expect, and tried not to worry too much about all the things that could go wrong. In February, Catherine received a letter that surprised her. It was from Marlene, the woman who had managed the Golden Rose, and Catherine opened it with trepidation. "Dear Catherine, I heard about what happened at your wedding from some of the girls. Ralph Carson came back here bragging about it, and I wanted you to know that I think he's a low-down snake. You were always a good girl, worked hard and stayed decent despite everything, and you deserved better than what this life offered you. I'm writing to tell you that Carson got what was coming to him. He tried his shakedown scheme on the wrong person, a railroad executive's daughter who had run away and was working in a saloon in Kansas City. The executive found out and had Carson arrested for extortion and blackmail. He's in prison now, looking at 5 years at least. I thought you'd want to know that he can't hurt you anymore. I hope you're happy with your rancher. You deserve all the good things, Catherine. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you are. Best wishes." Marlene Catherine showed the letter to James, and they both felt a weight lift that neither had fully acknowledged carrying. Carson had been a shadow hanging over them, the threat that he might return or cause more trouble always lurking at the edges of their happiness. Knowing he was behind bars brought a sense of relief and closure. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers and new grass, and Catherine's belly grew round and prominent. She moved more slowly now, tiring easily, but she had never felt more content. The ranch was thriving, her marriage was strong, and the baby moved constantly beneath her heart, reminding her that her life had truly begun anew. In late May, Catherine's labor began in the middle of the night. James immediately rode to get Maria while Tom stayed with Catherine, looking terrified but trying to be helpful. Maria arrived with her vast experience and calm demeanor, taking charge of the situation while James paced frantically downstairs. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Catherine had never experienced such pain, but Maria coached her through it, and the thought of meeting her baby kept her going. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy with a lusty cry and a full head of dark hair. James was allowed in to meet his son, and the look on his face when he held the tiny baby was something Catherine would treasure forever. There was wonder and love and an almost painful tenderness in his expression as he gazed down at the child they had created together. "He's perfect," James whispered. "Catherine, he's absolutely perfect." They named him Daniel James Thornton after James's father. Little Danny, as he quickly became known to distinguish him from ranch hand Danny Parker, was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Catherine was exhausted but happier than she had ever imagined possible, watching her husband hold their son and singing soft lullabies in the rocking chair James had made for her. The ranch community rallied around them in those early weeks. Maria came by almost daily to help, and her older daughters pitched in with cooking and cleaning. The ranch hands were absolutely smitten with the baby, taking turns sneaking peeks at him and arguing over who got to hold him first. Even some of the neighbors who had been standoffish after the wedding came by with gifts and congratulations, the arrival of an innocent baby seeming to soften hearts and bridge divides. As Danny grew from infant to toddler, the Thornton family settled into a rhythm. Catherine had never imagined she could be so happy, waking up each morning next to the man she loved, spending her days caring for her son and managing her home, working side by side with James to build something lasting and meaningful. The shame that had haunted her for so long faded more and more, replaced by pride in what she had become and what they had created together. 2 years after Danny was born, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose, a beautiful baby with James's green eyes and Catherine's dark curls. Danny was fascinated with his little sister, always wanting to help take care of her, and the house rang with laughter and children's voices. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. James bought additional land, expanding their holdings to 5,000 acres and running nearly 1,000 head of cattle. He hired 2 more ranch hands, good men recommended by Tom, and built a second barn to house the growing operation. Catherine managed the household with skill and efficiency, feeding the men, keeping the books, and raising their children with love and discipline. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. Danny grew into a sturdy boy with his father's quiet strength and his mother's quick mind, learning to ride almost before he could walk. Sarah was a spirited child, fearless and curious, always getting into mischief and charming her way out of trouble. When Danny was 6 and Sarah was 4, Catherine gave birth to twin boys, Matthew and Mark, who kept everyone on their toes with their boundless energy. By the time Catherine was 30, in 1886, she had been married to James for 8 years and was the mother of 4 children. The awkwardness and scandal of her past had faded into distant memory for most people. She was known throughout the county as an excellent ranch wife, a devoted mother, and a woman of strong character. Those who had judged her harshest had either moved on or been won over by time and the evidence of her good life. One evening, after putting all 4 children to bed, Catherine sat on the porch with James, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. James reached over and took her hand, and Catherine laced her fingers through his, marveling as she always did at how natural it felt. "Do you ever think about the past?" James asked quietly. "About what your life was like before you came here?" "Sometimes," Catherine admitted. "But it feels like it happened to someone else, a different person in a different life. That scared girl in the saloon seems so far away now." "You were never just a saloon girl," James said firmly. "You were always a survivor, a fighter, someone who refused to give up even when things were darkest." "That's who you are, Catherine. That's who you've always been." Catherine turned to look at her husband, seeing the gray beginning to thread through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. He was just as handsome to her now as he had been the day they met, maybe more so because she knew the depth of his character, the strength of his love. "You saved me," she said softly. "That day with the steer and every day since, you gave me a life I never thought I could have." "We saved each other," James corrected. "You brought life and love to this ranch to me. Before you came, I was just going through the motions, working toward a dream that felt hollow because I had no one to share it with. You made it real, Catherine. You and our children, you're everything." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sound of one of the twins crying, probably waking from a dream, and Catherine started to rise. But James stopped her. "I'll get him. You stay here and rest." Catherine watched her husband disappear inside, heard his gentle voice soothing their son, and felt a wave of love so strong it nearly took her breath away. This life, this family, this home they had built together was everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dared dream of. The years continued to unfold in seasons of planting and harvest, of cattle drives and winter snows, of children growing and love deepening. Danny showed a real aptitude for ranching, following his father everywhere and learning everything James could teach him. Sarah proved to have a gift with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animals with patience and kindness. The twins were inseparable, causing double the trouble but also double the joy. When Catherine was 35, she gave birth to her 5th and final child, a daughter they named Emily Catherine. The birth was harder than the others, and afterwards the doctor told Catherine gently that she should not have any more children, that her body had been through enough. Catherine accepted this news with equanimity, feeling blessed beyond measure with the 5 healthy children she had. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management and Catherine's careful household oversight. They had become one of the most respected families in the county, and their children were welcomed everywhere. Danny, at 15, was already being courted by several local ranchers as a future son-in-law, though he claimed to be too busy learning the cattle business to think about girls. Sarah, at 13, was popular and bright, with dreams of becoming a teacher. The twins, at 9, were terrorizing the countryside with their pranks and adventures. And little Emily, at 3, was everyone's darling, spoiled by her older siblings and doted on by her parents. In 1895, when Catherine was 37 and James was 43, they celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary with a large party at the ranch. Their children helped with the preparations, and friends and neighbors came from miles around to celebrate with them. It was a far cry from that difficult wedding day when Carson had tried to ruin their happiness, and Catherine could hardly believe how much had changed. Maria and Miguel were there with their now-grown children, several of whom had families of their own. Tom had retired from active ranch work, but still lived in a small cottage on the property, serving as a beloved grandfather figure to the Thornton children. Charlie had married and started his own small ranch nearby. Danny Parker had moved to Montana to try his luck in the silver mines. All the people who had stood by them through the early difficult days were there to celebrate this milestone. As the party wound down and guests began to depart, Catherine found herself standing at the same spot where they had been married, looking out over the ranch that had become her home. James came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, resting his chin on top of her head. "About how much I love this place, this life, Catherine said, covering his arms with her own. "About how impossible it seemed 17 years ago that I could ever be this happy, this blessed." "I told you that day that you were a rancher's wife now," James said, "but you became so much more than that. You became my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, the heart of this family. I don't tell you enough how much I love you, how grateful I am every single day that you came into my life." Catherine turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you too, James Thornton, more than words can ever express. You took a broken girl and helped her become a whole woman. You gave me a family, a home, a purpose. You loved me when I could not love myself, and you taught me that the past does not have to define the future." They kissed as the sun set behind them, a kiss full of 17 years of love and partnership, of weathering storms and celebrating triumphs, of building a life together one day at a time. When they finally broke apart, their children were watching from the porch with knowing smiles, having inherited both their father's strength and their mother's resilience. That night, lying in bed with James's arm around her, Catherine reflected on the long journey that had brought her from the Golden Rose Saloon to this moment. She thought about the girl she had been, desperate and ashamed, thinking her life was over before it had really begun. She thought about the woman she had become, strong and confident, surrounded by love and respect, living a life of purpose and meaning. The shame that had once defined her was gone, replaced by pride in what she had overcome and built. She was no longer haunted by whispered judgments or sideways glances. She was Catherine Thornton, wife to a good man, mother to 5 wonderful children, respected member of her community, living proof that the past does not have to be a prison. As she drifted off to sleep, Catherine sent up a prayer of thanks for second chances, for the cowboy who had saved her life in more ways than one, for the home they had built together on the Kansas prairie. She had been a saloon girl once, lost and ashamed. But James had seen past that to the woman she could become, and together they had created something beautiful and lasting. She was a rancher's wife now, and she had never been prouder of anything in her life. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and the Thornton family grew and changed with them. Danny married at 21, bringing home a sweet-natured girl from a neighboring ranch named Rebecca. They built a house on the far end of the Lazy T property, and Danny began taking over more of the daily ranch operations as James started to slow down slightly. his joints aching more on cold mornings and his back protesting after long days in the saddle. Sarah fulfilled her dream of becoming a teacher, going to normal school in Kansas City for training, and then returning to open a small school on the ranch for the children of the area. She taught reading and writing and arithmetic to a dozen students in a building James and Danny built specifically for that purpose, and she became known as one of the finest teachers in the county. The twins both stayed on the ranch, proving to be natural cowboys with easy ways with horses and cattle. They were 20 now, still inseparable but developing their own personalities, Matthew more serious and thoughtful, Mark more outgoing and adventurous. Emily, at 13, was showing signs of inheriting her mother's organizational skills and her father's business sense, already keeping detailed records of the cattle births and sales, tracking bloodlines and weights with meticulous care. In 1902, when Catherine was 44 and James was 50, they became grandparents for the first time when Rebecca gave birth to a son they named James Daniel, after both his grandfather and father. Catherine held her grandson for the first time and felt her heart expand in ways she had not thought possible, understanding for the first time what her own mother must have felt holding her all those years ago. More grandchildren followed over the years as Danny and Rebecca had 3 more children, and the twins eventually married and started families of their own. The ranch that had once been so isolated and lonely was now filled with 3 generations of Thorntons, children running and playing, multiple households working together to maintain the sprawling operation. James and Catherine moved into a smaller house closer to the main ranch buildings when Danny and Rebecca took over the main house, needing the space for their growing family. Catherine did not mind, finding the smaller space easier to maintain and enjoying the proximity to her grandchildren, who were constantly running in and out. Sarah remained unmarried, claiming she was too busy with her school to think about husbands, though Catherine suspected her daughter had simply never met anyone who measured up to her father. Emily eventually married a young lawyer from Abilene, moving into town but visiting the ranch frequently, her husband proving to be a good man who respected his wife's intelligence and ambition. As Catherine entered her 50s, she found herself looking back on her life with deep satisfaction. The scared 18-year-old who had walked into the Golden Rose Saloon out of desperation seemed like a character from a story she had once read, not her actual past. The years had been kind to her, her face lined now but still pretty, her dark hair threaded with silver, her body showing the wear of 5 pregnancies and decades of hard work, but still strong and capable. James had aged as well, his hair mostly gray now, his face deeply weathered by sun and wind, but his green eyes were as clear and loving as ever when he looked at her. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset, talking about their day and making plans for the future. The easy companionship they had built over nearly 30 years of marriage was perhaps the greatest treasure of Catherine's life. One spring evening in 1908, when Catherine was 50 and had been married to James for 30 years, they sat on their porch and watched their grandchildren playing in the yard, their laughter ringing out clear and joyful in the warm air. Danny and Rebecca's oldest son, young James, was 16 now and nearly as tall as his father, with the same green eyes and easy smile of his grandfather. The younger children ranged in age from 15 down to 3, a boisterous crowd of cousins who treated the entire ranch as their playground. 30 years, Catherine said wonderingly. Has it really been that long? Best 30 years of my life, James said, squeezing her hand. Though I have to say, you look exactly the same as the day I met you. Catherine laughed, a rich, warm sound that still made James's heart skip. You're a terrible liar, James Thornton, but I love you for it. We're old now, in case you had not noticed. Speak for yourself, James said with mock indignation. I'm in my prime. Your prime was 20 years ago and your back has been complaining about it ever since. They laughed together, the comfortable teasing of a long marriage, and Catherine felt a wave of contentment wash over her. This was what she had always wanted, even when she had not known to want it. Not just a husband and children, though those were precious beyond measure, but this sense of belonging, of being part of something larger than herself, of having built something meaningful that would continue long after she was gone. The Lazy T Ranch now sprawled over 10,000 acres, one of the largest operations in the county. The Thornton family name was synonymous with quality cattle and fair dealing. Catherine and James's children were respected members of the community, their grandchildren growing up with opportunities and advantages that neither Catherine nor James had known. The ranch that James had started with nothing but dreams and determination had become a legacy, something to pass down through the generations. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked suddenly. "Marrying me, I mean." "Taking on all the scandal and judgment, dealing with all the difficulties my past caused." James turned to look at her, his expression serious. "Catherine, I have never regretted a single moment of our life together, not one. Yes, there were hard times, and yes, some people made things more difficult than they needed to be, but I would do it all again in a heartbeat. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and marrying you was the smartest decision I ever made. Even when Carson tried to ruin us. Even when half the county was whispering about us. Especially then," James said firmly. "Because that was when I got to show everyone who you really are, not who they assumed you were based on ignorance and prejudice. And look at us now, Catherine. Look at what we built. Those people who judged you, most of them have come around, and the ones who have not, they don't matter. What matters is this family, this ranch, this life we've created together." Catherine leaned her head on James's shoulder, feeling tears prick at her eyes. Even after all these years, his unwavering faith in her still had the power to move her deeply. He had loved her when she could not love herself, had believed in her when no one else would, had stood by her through everything. There were not enough words to express what that meant. As the sun set and the children were called in for supper, Catherine and James sat a while longer, watching the sky turn from gold to rose to deep purple. The prairie stretched out around them, familiar and beloved, and Catherine felt the deep peace that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. She had been a saloon girl once, working in a place called the Golden Rose, serving drinks to cowboys and singing songs for their entertainment. She had been desperate and ashamed, thinking her life was over before it had truly begun. But then a cowboy had ridden into her life, lasso swinging, and everything had changed. James had not just saved her from a charging steer that day in Abilene. He had saved her from a life of shame and isolation, had given her the chance to become something more. He had looked past her mistakes and her past to see the woman she could be, and then he had loved her into becoming that woman. Now she was Catherine Thornton, rancher's wife, mother, grandmother, respected member of her community. She ran a household that fed a dozen people daily, managed the books for a 10,000-acre ranch, raised children who were good and decent people, and loved a man who had never once made her feel less than cherished. The shame was gone, worn away by years of honest work and genuine love. The past was just that past, something that had happened but did not define her. She had built a new life, a good life, a life full of purpose and meaning and love. As they finally rose to go inside, Catherine stopped James at the door, pulling him into a kiss that held 30 years of gratitude and devotion. When they broke apart, James smiled down at her, that slow, warm smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. "I love you, Catherine Thornton." "I love you too, James, always and forever." They walked inside together, hand in hand, into the house filled with the sounds of family, the smells of supper, the warmth of home. And Catherine knew, with the deep certainty that comes from lived experience, that she had found exactly what she had been searching for all along. She had been a saloon girl, but James had seen past that. He had said, "You're a rancher's wife now," and in saying it, he had made it true. not just in name but in every way that mattered. He had given her a place to belong, a purpose to fulfill, a family to love. He had given her a second chance at life, and she had taken it and built something beautiful. The years stretched ahead of them still, though fewer now than lay behind. There would be more grandchildren, perhaps even great-grandchildren before the end. There would be more sunsets watched from the porch, more shared meals and quiet conversations, more moments of simple, perfect happiness. The ranch would continue under Danny's capable management, and eventually young James and his siblings and cousins would take over, keeping the legacy alive. But all of that was still to come. For now, in this moment, Catherine was simply grateful. Grateful for the cowboy who had saved her life and then given her a reason to live it. Grateful for the children they had raised and the home they had built. Grateful for the transformation from saloon girl to rancher's wife, from shame to pride, from isolation to belonging. As night settled over the Lazy T Ranch and the stars emerged in the vast Kansas sky, Catherine stood at the window of their bedroom and looked out at the land she had come to love as much as life itself. James came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, and they stood there together in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over the prairie. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as every day did on a working ranch. But Catherine faced the future with confidence, knowing that whatever came, she and James would face it together as they always had. The past was behind her, forgiven and forgotten by everyone who mattered. The future stretched ahead, full of promise and possibility. She had been a saloon girl once, but that girl was gone, replaced by a woman who had fought for her second chance and won. A woman who had built a life worth living and a family worth treasuring. A woman who had proven that the past does not have to dictate the future, that shame can be overcome, that love really can conquer all. Catherine Thornton, rancher's wife, turned in her husband's arms and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. And as James held her close, she knew that she was finally, completely home.